Section 1. Normandy before the storm. June 13, 1944. Near Villers-Bocage, Normandy. The morning air smells of damp earth and crushed hedgerow leaves. Inside the turret of his Panther tank, Oberfeldwebel Karl-Heinz Richter wipes condensation from the edge of his periscope with a gloved thumb. The engine idles beneath him, a deep metallic growl that vibrates through steel plates and into bone. Somewhere ahead, beyond the green walls of bocage country, the Americans are moving. He knows it. Everyone does. Richter is 27 years old, a veteran of the Eastern Front. He has fought T-34s at Kursk, watched Tigers burn under Soviet artillery, and learned to trust German steel more than instinct. To him, the Americans are a curiosity, latecomers to a war already decided in blood. Their tanks, from what he has heard, are thin-skinned, tall silhouettes with gasoline engines that catch fire easily. The men joke about them in the evenings, call them Tommy cookers, say they burn if you look at them too hard. The M4 Sherman does not frighten German tank crews in the summer of 1944. Not yet. Across the fields, concealed beneath camouflaged netting and broken apple trees, Richter's Panther belongs to a Kampfgruppe pulled together in haste after the Allied landings. Normandy has become a maze of narrow roads, sunken lanes, and hedgerows taller than houses. This is not the sweeping terrain of Russia or the open deserts of North Africa. It is close, claustrophobic country where a tank can die without ever seeing what killed it. Richter adjusts his headset as his commander, Lieutenant Franz Adler, leans forward in the cupola. Adler is calm, almost bored, binoculars resting against the rim of his hatch. He has fought the British at Cannes and considers the Americans undisciplined by comparison. If they come straight down the road, Adler says, voice flat over the intercom, we'll take them one by one. The assumption is simple and deeply ingrained. German armor doctrine is built on the duel. Superior optics, longer guns, thicker frontal armor. Panthers and Tigers are hunters by design, meant to kill from range. The Sherman, with its 75mm gun and vertical armor, is something to be dispatched, not feared. At division headquarters, these beliefs are shared at every level. Intelligence reports describe American tanks in large numbers. Yes, but poorly coordinated, too dependent on artillery and air support. German officers scoff at the idea that quantity can compensate for quality. The war, they believe, is still decided by who has the better machine and the steadier nerve. What they do not yet understand is that the Sherman is not meant to fight alone. Several kilometers to the west, near a dirt road churned into mud by tracked vehicles, Sergeant William Red Hawkins stands beside his Sherman, helmet pushed back, cigarette trembling between his fingers. Hawkins is from Ohio, drafted in 1942, trained in Louisiana and England, and landed on Omaha Beach 1 week earlier. He has seen bodies in the surf and burning tanks on the bluffs. He has learned, very quickly, that survival is not about having the biggest gun. It is about staying alive long enough to fire again. His tank is one of many in the 2nd Armored Division. They sit in a staggered formation, engines quiet, waiting for the order to advance. Infantry crouch nearby, rifles resting on hedgerow banks. Overhead, the distant hum of aircraft never entirely fades. The Americans have brought everything with them. Trucks, radios, engineers, artillery observers. It is not elegant. It is not subtle, but it is relentless. Hawkins knows the rumors too. He has heard about Panthers and Tigers, about shells that bounce off German armor like pebbles. He has also heard something else, passed quietly between crews after dark. Stick together. Call for artillery. Let the fighter-bombers do their work. Don't fight their war. Fight yours. As the sun climbs higher, the order finally comes. Engines roar to life across the American line, a chorus of mechanical noise that rolls through the countryside. Sherman tanks begin to move, not in a single spearhead, but in waves spreading out, covering roads, fields, and hedgerow gaps simultaneously. From his concealed position, Richter sees them first. Tall silhouettes emerging from the greenery, turrets scanning, infantry clinging close behind. He feels a flicker of anticipation, almost excitement. This is what his tank was built for. Targets, Adler says calmly. The Panther's gun swings into position. But even as Richter lines up the first Sherman in his sights, something feels different. There are too many of them. They're not advancing blindly down the road. They're fanning out, probing, stopping, reversing, calling something in over the radio. A distant thunder rolls across the fields. Artillery. Richter flinches as shells begin to fall, not on the Shermans, but around German positions. Hedgerows explode into showers of dirt and leaves. The ground shakes. Visibility drops. Adler curses under his breath as smoke creeps into their firing lane. Then above it all comes another sound. A rising whine, unmistakable. Aircraft. Richter suddenly understands that the Americans are not charging him. They are circling. He tightens his grip on the controls as the first rocket streaks down from the sky. Section 2. The Myth of the Duel. The rocket strikes a hedgerow 50 meters to the left, tearing earth and roots into the air. Richter feels the concussion through the hull as much as he hears it. Dirt rains down on the Panther's engine deck. Adler shouts orders, his comm finally cracking as he slams the cupola hatch shut. Move! Now! The Panther lurches forward, tracks biting into the soft Norman soil. Richter swings the tank away from its firing position, smoke billowing around them. Through the periscope, the world becomes fragments, green hedges, brown earth, flashes of steel. The Sherman he had been about to destroy disappears behind smoke and foliage, replaced by something worse. Time. For years, German tank crews have trained to fight other tanks. Identify, range, fire, kill. It is a clean, almost mathematical process. But here, in Normandy, the equation is breaking down. The Americans are not presenting themselves as targets. They are forcing movement, forcing reaction, forcing mistakes. As the Panther rumbles down a narrow lane, Adler calls out bearings, searching for a new position. Richter feels sweat pooling under his collar despite the cool morning air. The radio crackles with overlapping voices. Other German crews reporting air attacks, artillery fire, infantry falling back. The sense of control, so central to German armor doctrine, is slipping away. Behind them, another rocket screams down. The explosion is closer this time. Shrapnel rattles against the armor like thrown gravel. Richter instinctively ducks, though he knows the steel around him is thick enough to stop it. What he cannot stop is the feeling that they're being watched from every direction. A kilometer away, Sergeant Hawkins grips the rim of his turret as a Sherman creeps forward along the hedgerow. He does not see the Panther. He does not need to. Somewhere ahead, his platoon leader has spotted German armor, marked the position, and called it in. The artillery liaison is already adjusting fire. The fighter bombers are already circling. This is not a duel. It is a hunt. Hawkins remembers his training back in England, the lectures that seemed dull at the time. Combined arms, infantry screens, radio discipline, trust the system. At the time, he had wondered if all that coordination would fall apart under fire. Now, as shells burst ahead and German machine gun fire sputters and dies, he sees it working. The Sherman lurches to a halt. Hawkins' gunner peers through the sight, tense but patient. They're not told to rush forward. They are told to wait, to let the pressure build. In the Panther, Richter finally spots movement through a break in the hedgerow. A Sherman, hull down, turret just visible. He swings the gun, heart pounding. This is it. This is where German steel proves itself. Fire, Adler orders. The Panther's 75mm gun roars, the recoil slamming Richter back against his seat. Through the smoke, he watches the shell streak toward the Sherman and vanish into a wall of dirt as it hits the hedgerow just short of the target. Reload. Before he can correct the aim, the world explodes again. Not from the front, from behind. An American artillery shell detonates near the rear of the Panther, flipping earth and metal into the air. The tank shudders violently. Warning lights flicker. The engine stutters. Richter's hands fly over the controls as he fights to keep the Panther moving. Adler shouts for damage reports. The radio is alive with panic now, voices overlapping, units calling for The Germans are being forced out of position, driven from cover to cover like animals flushed from tall grass. This is the moment the myth begins to crack. German crews had believed that the Sherman's weaknesses would dictate the battle. Thin armor, a smaller gun, a tall profile. But what they are encountering instead is not a tank alone, but a network. Every Sherman is connected by radio. Every advance is supported by infantry. Every resistance point is mapped, marked, and crushed by artillery or air power before it can settle into a comfortable firing position. The Panther finally reaches a small clearing, smoke trailing from its engine deck. Richter swings the tank to face the hedgerow again, desperate for a clean shot, and he's shot. His hands shake as he peers through the sight. And then he sees them. Not one Sherman. 3. They're spread out, angled, their turrets scanning. One fires smoke. Another reverses behind cover. The third stops, steady, patient, gun trained on the gap Richter has just emerged from. Richter feels a cold realization settle in his chest. They are not charging. They are positioning. They are waiting for him to make the next move. A sharp crack rings out. The Panther jolts as a shell slams into its side armor. It does not penetrate, but it does not need to. The impact rocks the tank, throwing off Richter's aim and buying precious seconds. Seconds the Americans use. Another artillery barrage crashes down, closer than before. The ground becomes a churning sea of explosions. Richter tastes metal and dust. He hears Adler shouting orders he can barely understand. For the first time since he climbed into a tank, Richter does not feel like the hunter. He feels surrounded. Section 3. Learning Under Fire. June 14, 1944. The hedgerows south of Corentin. Night has fallen, but the battlefield does not sleep. Fires flicker in the distance, casting uneven light across shattered trees and wrecked vehicles. The smell of burned fuel hangs thick in the air. Somewhere, a wounded man cries out, his voice fading into the darkness. Oberfeldwebel Karl-Heinz Richter sits on the ground beside his disabled Panther, helmet off, hands black with grease and soot. The tank's engine is silent now. A twisted mess of metal after a near miss from artillery ruptured the cooling system. They managed to withdraw before the final blow came, abandoning the vehicle under cover of darkness. It is not burning. Not yet. But it will never fight again. Richter stares at it as if it has betrayed him. Around him, other crews do the same. Panthers and Panzer IVs sit gutted or half-buried in hedgerows, victims not of clean tank-on-tank kills, but of a grinding process that has worn them down piece by piece. Tracks blown off, optics shattered, radios destroyed, engines crippled by fragments and shock waves. The American tanks rarely delivered the killing blow. They did not have to. At regimental command posts across Normandy, German officers pore over maps under flickering lamps. Reports arrive in a steady stream, each one eroding confidence further. Enemy armor advancing in large numbers. Heavy artillery concentrations. Constant air attacks. Positions untenable in daylight. Counterattacks failing before they can fully deploy. The Americans, the reports say, do not seek decisive armored engagements. They seek control of space. Roads, junctions, fields. They advance, halt, probe, then advance again, always under a protective umbrella of fire. This is not how German armored doctrine envisioned the fight in the West. In a battered farmhouse turned command post, General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, commander of the elite Panzer Lehr division, listens grimly as his staff briefs him. Panzer Lehr had been one of the best-equipped divisions in the German army, filled with veterans and modern armor. It was supposed to blunt the Allied invasion. Instead, it is being slowly dismantled. Bayerlein does not mock the Sherman. He does not underestimate it. He understands something many of his subordinates are only beginning to grasp. The Americans are fighting a different kind of armored war, one built on logistics, coordination, and overwhelming support. The Sherman is not the centerpiece. It is the instrument. On the American side, the learning curve is just as steep, but it bends in a different direction. Sergeant Hawkins sits on the turret of his Sherman, boots dangling, canteen in hand. His crew is exhausted. They have been moving and stopping, firing and waiting for nearly 12 hours. They have lost 2 tanks in the platoon, one to a hidden anti-tank gun, another to a mine. But they have advanced. Hawkins listens as the company commander briefs them quietly. German armor is still present, still dangerous, but it no longer dominates the battlefield the way intelligence reports once suggested. When it appears, it is quickly marked, isolated, and suppressed. The key is patience, discipline, trusting the process even when instinct screams to charge or retreat. Hawkins thinks back to Omaha Beach, to the chaos and fear of those first hours. He remembers thinking that no plan could survive this kind of fire. Now, in the hedgerows, he sees the opposite. The plan survives because it adapts. American engineers are already modifying Sherman tanks, welding improvised steel prongs to their fronts. Rhino tanks, they call them. The prongs are crude, cut from German beach obstacles, but they work. Shermans can now burst through hedgerows instead of climbing over them, avoiding exposure to hidden guns. Every day, small changes accumulate. Better coordination with infantry, faster artillery response times, improved air-ground communication. The Americans are not brilliant tacticians. They are relentless learners. For German crews like Richter, the battlefield feels increasingly hostile. They can still kill Shermans. When they catch one in the open, the result is often decisive. But those opportunities are becoming rare. The Americans do not give them clean fights. Instead, Richter and his comrades find themselves constantly moving, constantly reacting. They fire, then withdraw. They relocate, only to be bracketed by artillery again. They attempt ambushes, only to be flanked by infantry and forced back under smoke and fire. One evening, Richter overhears a young Panzer grenadier mutter something that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. "I'd rather face the Russians again," he says quietly. At least you knew where they were coming from. The realization spreads slowly, like a sickness. The Sherman is not dangerous because of what it is. It is dangerous because of what surrounds it. By the 3rd week of June, German tank losses in Normandy are mounting at an alarming rate. Not all are destroyed. Many are abandoned, damaged beyond quick repair. Fuel shortages grow worse. Spare parts become scarce. Recovery vehicles cannot operate in daylight without being attacked from the air. Richter watches another Panther burn one afternoon, hit not by a Sherman, but by a rocket from AP-47 Thunderbolt that dies out of the clouds with terrifying precision. The explosion flips the tank onto its side. There are no survivors. That night, Richter lies awake in a shallow trench, helmet pulled low, listening to the distant rumble of engines and guns. For the first time, he wonders not how to defeat the Americans, but how long they can hold them back. Somewhere beyond the hedgerows, the Shermans are moving again. Section 4. Operation Cobra. July 25, 1944. Near St. Lo, Normandy. The dawn does not arrive gently. It comes in a roar. At precisely 9:38 hours, the sky over the German lines west of St. Lo fills with aircraft. Hundreds of them. Heavy bombers first, their formations stretching from horizon to horizon, followed by fighter bombers stacked in layers behind them. The sound is not like artillery or tank fire. It is deeper, heavier, a rolling thunder that seems to press the air itself downward. Oberfeldwebel Karl-Heinz Richter is on his feet when the first bombs fall. He has been reassigned to another Panther, one hastily repaired and rushed back into service. The tank is dug in near a tree line, part of a thin defensive screen thrown together to hold what remains of the front. Richter has been told this is another American probe. He does not believe it. The earth erupts. Bombs smash into the Norman countryside with catastrophic force. Entire hedgerows vanish. Roads are peeled open. Trees are uprooted and thrown like matchsticks. The concussion slams Richter flat, even through the weight of his body armor and helmet. The Panther rocks violently in its shallow pit, suspension screaming under the shock. Inside the tank, instruments flicker and die. The radio goes silent. Dust pours in through every seam. Richter tastes blood and soil. He hears someone screaming, but cannot tell if it is inside the tank or outside. This is not a battle. This is annihilation. Operation Cobra has begun. For weeks, American forces have been locked in the hedgerows, bleeding forward yard by yard. Now, they are unleashing everything they have learned. Cobra is not an armored thrust in the German sense. It is not a clean breakthrough led by tanks. It is a rupture designed to shatter cohesion, morale, and command. The bombing lasts less than an hour, but when it ends, the battlefield is unrecognizable. Richter climbs from the Panther, legs shaking, ears ringing. Around him, the ground is cratered and burning. Vehicles lie overturned or buried. Bodies, German infantry, tank crews, horses are scattered amid the wreckage. Command posts no longer exist. Landmarks are gone. The front line has ceased to be a line at all. Some Panthers still move. Most do not. Far to the west, Sergeant Hawkins watches the bombardment from behind a low ridge. Even from this distance, the force of it is terrifying. He has never seen anything like it. None of them have. The sky darkens with smoke, and the ground seems to pulse beneath their tracks. When the order finally comes, it is almost anticlimactic. Advance. Sherman tanks roll forward, not charging, not racing, but advancing methodically into the shattered zone. Infantry follows close behind, wary weapons ready. Engineers probe for mines. Artillery shifts, fire deeper inland. Hawkins feels a strange calm as his Sherman crosses the line of departure. Whatever waits ahead, it cannot be worse than what the Germans have just endured. They encounter resistance almost immediately, but it is fragmented. Isolated machine gun nests. Lone anti-tank guns firing once or twice before being silenced. A Panther appears briefly through the smoke, fires wildly, then retreats, only to be struck moments later by artillery called in by a forward observer riding in a half-track. This is the system at work. The Sherman does not lead the assault as a knight charging a castle gate. It moves as part of a wave, filling gaps, exploiting weakness, pressing forward where resistance has collapsed. When German armor appears, it is rarely engaged directly unless conditions favor the Americans. More often, the Sherman marks the target, fixes it in place, and waits for the hammer to fall. For Richter, Cobra is the moment everything changes. He tries to regroup what remains of his unit, but there is no clear chain of command. Radios are destroyed. Officers are missing or dead. Orders arrive late or not at all. The Americans are everywhere, pushing through gaps that should not exist, appearing on roads the Germans thought impassable. Richter's Panther fires twice that afternoon, destroying one Sherman at close range. The victory feels hollow. Within minutes, smoke shells blind them, artillery walks closer, and a flight of fighter bombers swoops in low. Richter barely escapes with his life as the tank is abandoned for the second time in 2 months. As night falls on July 25th, the German front west of St. Lo has effectively collapsed. The Americans have not won by superior tank duels. They have won by destroying the environment in which German tanks are effective. In the days that follow, the breakout accelerates. Sherman columns pour through the breach, fanning out across open country for the first time since D-Day. Roads fill with American vehicles moving south and west, engines humming, radios alive with orders and reports. German tank crews begin to speak openly of being hunted, not by individual Shermans, but by something larger, something relentless. The mockery is gone now. What remains is exhaustion, fear, and the growing certainty that this war in the West has entered a phase Germany cannot control. Section 8. The Meaning of the Hunt. September 15th, 1944. Near the German border, autumn begins to creep into the countryside. The heat of August fades into cooler mornings, mist rising from fields at dawn, clinging to low ground and river valleys. The war, however, shows no sign of cooling. Engines still rumble before sunrise. Artillery still thunders in the distance. The front has moved hundreds of kilometers since Normandy, but the logic of the fighting remains the same. Sergeant William Hawkins stands beside his Sherman as maintenance crews finish a quick inspection. The tank bears scars now. Weld marks, dents where shrapnel struck, faded chalk markings from past operations. It is no longer new, no longer clean, but it runs. It always runs. That, Hawkins has learned, matters more than anything else. Ahead lies Germany itself. The enemy they face now is different from the one in Normandy. German units are thinner, less cohesive, but also more desperate. The certainty of defeat has not eliminated resistance. In some cases, it has sharpened it. Panthers and Tigers still appear, fewer in number, but still lethal when positioned well. Yet the reaction is no longer fear. It is procedure. A report of German armor comes in over the radio. Hawkins' platoon halts. Infantry spreads out. Artillery coordinates are passed. Aircraft are requested if the weather allows. The Sherman's gun remains trained forward, steady, ready to fire if needed, but it is no longer the sole answer. Hawkins realizes that he no longer thinks of his tank as a weapon meant to win duels. He thinks of it as a node in a web, a mobile sensor, a blocking force, a presence that denies space to the enemy. This is the true transformation that occurred in Normandy. For years before the war, armored theorists debated the decisive qualities of tanks. Armor thickness, gun caliber, speed. The Sherman lost most of those debates on paper. German crews like Richter were raised on those assumptions, trained to believe that technical superiority equaled battlefield dominance. What Normandy destroyed was not just tanks, but ideas. Oberfeldwebel Karl-Heinz Richter sits in a prisoner-of-war camp somewhere in northern France. The sounds of the front now distant but still faintly audible. He has time to think. Too much time. He replays battles in his mind, searching for the moment things truly turned. It was not when his Panther was disabled, not when Cobra shattered the front, not even at Falaise. It was earlier, he realizes. It was the moment he first felt watched. The moment when firing a single shot brought artillery down on his position. When movement drew aircraft. When even victory over a Sherman led not to triumph, but to immediate retaliation. That was when the hunt truly began. Richter understands now that the Americans never intended the Sherman to be the ultimate fighting machine. They intended it to be sufficient. Good enough to survive long enough for the rest of the system to act. And because they could build it in vast numbers, supply it endlessly, and integrate it seamlessly, sufficiency became dominance. The German army had chased excellence at the cost of sustainability. The Americans had chased momentum. As autumn deepens, the Allied advance slows at the borders of Germany, checked by terrain, weather, and renewed resistance. The war is not over. More blood will be spilled. More tanks will burn. But the outcome is no longer in doubt. The Sherman continues to roll forward into forests, across rivers, through towns reduced to rubble. Sometimes it faces Panthers head-on and loses. Sometimes it wins. Often, it does neither. It simply fixes the enemy in place long enough for something else to arrive. That is the essence of being hunted. German tank crews who survive long enough to reflect on the war will later speak of this shift, of how the Sherman changed from an object of mockery to a signal of danger, of how seeing one did not mean a duel, but the arrival of an entire battlefield focused on their position. Hawkins senses the war drawing toward its final chapters. He knows there will be no parade for his tank, no monument to its design brilliance. But he also knows this. When the story of the war is told, the Sherman will be there in every chapter, not as the hero, but as the constant. The hunter is rarely glamorous. It is simply persistent. Section 7. After the Pocket. August 28, 1944. Somewhere east of the Seine River. The war has changed its rhythm. The slow, grinding pressure of Normandy has given way to motion. Roads, once clogged with wreckage, now echo with the steady movement of Allied columns pushing deeper into France. Villages blur past. Rivers are crossed in days instead of weeks. The German army, battered and disorganized after Falaise, is no longer capable of sustained resistance in the open. Oberfeldwebel Karl-Heinz Richter sits in the back of a captured German truck repurposed to carry prisoners. His hands rest loosely on his knees, wrists bound, eyes fixed on the passing countryside. He has not slept properly in days. Hunger has dulled into something distant, almost irrelevant. As the truck rolls past a crossroads, he sees them again. Shermans. They are everywhere now, parked beside fuel trucks, moving in columns, guarding bridges, resting beside infantry units cleaning weapons in the shade. They no longer appear as isolated machines, but as part of a living, moving organism. Richter notices details he once dismissed. The ease with which crews communicate, the speed of refueling, the calm efficiency of maintenance teams replacing track links and road wheels in the open. He realizes with a quiet certainty that the German army could never match this pace anymore. Even if the Panthers and Tigers were superior in isolation, they could not be everywhere at once. The Sherman could. Sergeant Hawkins feels that difference every day. His unit has crossed the Seine with scarcely a pause, advancing so quickly that maps are outdated almost as soon as they are issued. French civilians line the roads, cheering, waving flags, offering wine and bread. Hawkins smiles and waves back, but his eyes never stop scanning. He has learned the lesson of Normandy too well to relax completely. German resistance still flares unexpectedly. A lone Panther firing from concealment. A hastily aim-placed anti-tank gun covering a bridge. Each time, the response is immediate and overwhelming. Sherman tanks fix the threat. Infantry maneuvers. Artillery pounds the position. The advance resumes. There is no pause for mockery now. No room for underestimation. Hawkins remembers stories from early in the campaign, from veterans who laughed nervously about how German crews scoffed at the Sherman. He understands why they did. On paper, the Sherman is still inferior in many ways. Its armor remains thinner. Its gun still struggles against the heaviest German tanks from the front. But those comparisons feel academic now, detached from the reality of how the war is actually being fought. Richter, too, thinks back to those early days, to the confidence he felt sitting behind thick frontal armor, believing in range tables and penetration charts. He wonders how many German crews are still alive who share those memories. Not many, he suspects. The Americans do not seek the perfect tank. They seek momentum. By September, the German army in the West is fighting a delaying action, buying time it cannot afford. Every kilometer gained by the Allies deepens the imbalance. Fuel shortages worsen. Replacement tanks arrive too slowly. Crews lack training. Units lack cohesion. The Sherman continues forward. Hawkins' unit pushes toward the German border, the war feeling both closer to ending and more dangerous than ever. The enemy is wounded, but still capable of sudden violence, still capable of killing. One evening, as his crew prepares defensive positions near crossroads, Hawkins climbs down from the turret and sits on the hull, listening to the engine tick as it cools. He thinks about how different this feels from the early days. Back then, every rumor of German armor brought dread. Now it brings focus. He understands something now that he did not then. Fear has shifted sides. German tank crews no longer assume superiority. They assume vulnerability. They expect to be outnumbered, outflanked, and observed. The psychological balance has tilted, not because of any single weapon, but because of a system that never stops applying pressure. Richter feels that pressure even in captivity. Even as a prisoner, he senses that the Americans are not slowing down. The war is moving past him, leaving behind wreckage, memories, and the certainty that what he once believed about armored warfare no longer applies. The Sherman did not defeat German armor by proving itself stronger. It defeated it by proving it was unavoidable. Section 6. The Trap Closing. August 12, 1944. Near Falaise, France. The heat is oppressive, pressing down on the land like a physical weight. Dust coats everything. Uniforms, weapons, faces, turning men and machines the same dull gray. The roads are choked with traffic, not the disciplined columns of an advancing army, but the desperate congestion of forces trying to escape. Oberfeldwebel Karl-Heinz Richter moves on foot now, his tank long gone, his crew scattered. He carries a rifle he barely remembers being issued, its sling cutting into his shoulder as he pushes through a mass of retreating soldiers, horse-drawn wagons, staff cars, and shattered units that no longer know who commands them. This is the Falaise Pocket forming around them. The Americans and Canadians are closing from the west and north. The British are pressing from the east. Sherman tanks appear on ridgelines, at crossroads, at the far end of roads that moments ago seemed clear. They're not charging into the pocket. They're sealing it methodically, like hunters tightening a noose. Richter watches a column of German vehicles attempt to break through a narrow gap at dawn. Panthers, Panzer IVs, half-tracks, infantry on foot, all surge forward together in a last gamble. Almost immediately, artillery fire crashes down, walking up the road with terrible precision. Vehicles explode. Horses scream. Men scatter into ditches. Then the aircraft arrive. P-47s and Typhoons dive again and again, rockets and cannon fire, shredding anything that moves. Sherman tanks appear on the flanks, firing into the chaos, not to engage the strongest armor, but to sow panic, to block paths of retreat, to force survivors into killing zones. Richter throws himself into a ditch as a rocket strikes nearby. The shockwave knocks the breath from his lungs. When he looks up, the road is a graveyard. This is not combat as he understood it. It is extermination. For Sergeant Hawkins, Falaise is unlike anything he has experienced. His Sherman sits hull down on a low rise, engine idling, gun trained on a road clogged with German vehicles. He can see them clearly now, burning tanks, abandoned trucks, soldiers waving white cloth or running for cover. The order comes to hold fire unless threatened. The pocket must be sealed, not provoked into another breakout attempt. Hawkins watches German soldiers surrender in groups, hands raised, faces hollow with exhaustion and shock. He feels no hatred, only a grim awareness that this is what victory looks like. The Sherman's role here is not glorious. It is not dueling tigers or smashing through defenses. It is presence, control, the quiet, relentless assertion that there is nowhere left to go. German tank crews who once mocked the Sherman now fear it precisely because of this. When a Sherman appears, it means the Americans are already organized. It means artillery is in range. It means aircraft are minutes away. It means escape routes are closing. Richter understands this fully now. As he crawls through fields and ditches, avoiding roads and open ground, he knows that the Sherman itself may not kill him, but its appearance signals that something else soon will. On August 21st, the Falaise Pocket finally collapses. Tens of thousands of German soldiers are captured. Thousands more are killed. What remains of the German armored force in Normandy is shattered beyond recovery. The road east is littered with wrecks, twisted steel marking the path of a defeated army. As Richter is taken prisoner days later, exhausted and hollow-eyed, he watches a line of Shermans rumble past, turrets forward, radios crackling. They do not stop. They do not look back. They move on, already hunting the next objective. Section 5, The Open Country, July 30th, 1944. South of Avranches, Normandy. For the first time since the invasion, the hedgerows begin to thin. The land opens into rolling fields, wider roads, longer sight lines. This is terrain German tank crews once believed would favor them. Open ground, space to maneuver, distance to bring their superior guns to bear. But the reality waiting beyond the Cobra breakout is not the one they imagined. Oberfeldwebel Karl-Heinz Richter rides atop a half-track now, his uniform stained with dust and sweat, eyes scanning the horizon. His unit has been reduced to fragments. Panthers without fuel, crews without tanks, orders that arrive too late to matter. The withdrawal south is less a maneuver than a flight, shaped by pressure rather than intent. Every road feels exposed. The Americans are moving faster than German intelligence predicted. Sherman columns advance day and night, leapfrogging forward, bypassing resistance, leaving isolated pockets to be mopped up by infantry. When German armor attempts to counterattack, it is rarely met head-on. Instead, it is fixed, flanked, and crushed. Richter watches a Panther attempt to take up a firing position on a low ridge. Before it can settle, artillery crashes down, forcing it to pull back. Minutes later, fighter bombers arrive, diving in pairs, rockets streaking toward the retreating tank. The Panther never fires a shot. The sky belongs to the Americans. For Sergeant Hawkins, the open country feels almost unreal. After weeks of claustrophobic hedgerow fighting, the ability to see for kilometers is disorienting. His Sherman moves in a column of armor stretching as far as he can see, dust clouds rising behind them like a moving storm. This is where the Sherman truly comes into its own. The tank is reliable, easy to maintain, easy to repair. When one breaks down, another takes its place. Fuel trucks and ammunition carriers are never far behind. Radios crackle constantly, linking tank crews to artillery batteries, infantry units, and aircraft overhead. Hawkins' platoon advances rapidly, sometimes covering distances in hours that would have taken days in the hedgerows. When German resistance appears, it is often hesitant, poorly coordinated. The confidence Hawkins once feared in German tank crews is gone, replaced by caution and delay. One afternoon, a German Panzer IV appears on a distant ridge, firing at maximum range. Hawkins' gunner returns fire, but the shells fall short. Instead of pushing forward, Hawkins does what he has been trained to do. He calls it in. Within minutes, artillery shells bracket the ridge. The Panzer IV reverses, tries to escape. AP-47 dives from the clouds and releases its rockets. The tank erupts in flame. Hawkins does not cheer. He does not feel triumphant. He feels something quieter, heavier, understanding. The Sherman is not winning these fights because it is better. It is winning because it is never alone. German tank commanders, once trained to exploit initiative and aggression, now find those instincts punished. Any movement in daylight risks air attack. Any concentration of armor draws artillery fire. Any delay allows American units to maneuver around them. Richter feels this pressure constantly. Even when his unit halts to refuel or regroup, there is no sense of safety. American reconnaissance elements seem to appear everywhere. Armored cars, light tanks, infantry patrols probing roads and villages ahead of the main advance. He overhears a fellow tanker mutter, "They know where we are before we do." By early August, the German command situation in Normandy is deteriorating rapidly. Hitler issues orders forbidding withdrawal, demanding counterattacks that cannot be sustained. Units are ordered to hold ground that no longer exists in any meaningful sense. The Americans exploit this ruthlessly. Sherman units bypass strong points, isolate German formations, and sever supply lines. What German armor remains is forced into piecemeal engagements, fighting not as concentrated units, but as scattered individuals. Richter participates in one such action near Mortain. A desperate German counterattack is launched in an attempt to cut off American spearheads. Panthers and infantry move forward under cover of darkness, achieving initial surprise. By daylight, it is over. American artillery pounds the attackers. Fighter bombers tear into the columns. Sherman tanks appear on flanks and rear, not to engage directly, but to block escape routes. What began as an offensive becomes a trap. Richter escapes again, shaken and exhausted, his faith in German armored doctrine finally shattered. The Sherman, once mocked, has become the face of an unstoppable advance. Not because it is invincible, but because it is everywhere. Always pressing, always supported, always part of something larger. As August unfolds, German tank crews no longer laugh when they spot a Sherman. They measure distances, they scan the sky, and they wonder how long they can survive being hunted.